They said a child was left behind at Angel's Rest Station, but what they didn't say is who left her and why I couldn't walk away. Chapter 1. How could I run from what already knew my name before I ever called it? Enemy. The wind at Angel's Rest was a thief. It stole hats off heads, prayers off lips, and reason right out of my chest. I stepped off the train with my mother's ashes clutched to my ribs and a marriage back in Denver that felt more like a legal arrangement than anything holy. The ground here was cracked and thirsty dust curling in the air like smoke without fire. I hadn't planned to stay longer than a night. But then I saw her. She sat on a splintered bench like she'd been carved from the wood itself, still rough around the edges, not quite finished. Barefoot knees pulled tight to her chest, a pair of women's boots slung over her shoulder by their laces like stolen things. Her dress was too small, hitched high on her thin legs, and her eyes didn't move even when the train hissed and groaned behind us. She looked like she'd stopped believing things came back once they left. A cloth rabbit dangled from one hand, ear torn clean through. It had no face, neither did she in a way. Her expression was empty in the way only children who have known loss too early can be. I saw it once in the mirror after my second miscarriage. Charles had gone to a dinner party that night, said he didn't know what to say to me when I broke. No one stood near her. The station agent had already locked up. The mail cart passed without pause. 2 cowboys glanced her way, then looked off like she was a debt they couldn't afford to pay. The sheriff strolled by, slow as spurs, ticking like a metronome. He squinted at her. "Where's your folks, girl?" She didn't lift her eyes. "My mama died today." The sheriff shifted like his boots got too tight. "Well, preacher's wife might know what to do. Wait here." And he walked off. She didn't ask him to stay. She didn't ask for anything. I was halfway to the boarding house when I turned back. I told myself it was to give her food, a scarf, something useful. That was a lie. The truth is more dangerous. I wanted to matter to someone again, even for a minute. By the time I returned, the light had gone gold and mean. That wind picked up, pulling the scent of iron from the tracks and sage from the hills. She was still there. I knelt slowly, the scarf folded in my hand. "You cold?" She didn't nod, but she took it. Her fingers were small but calloused, like she'd worked more than she played. "What's your name, Ellie?" she said. "Just Ellie." "Where are you headed?" "Nowhere." The answer sat between us like a closing door. I offered her the biscuit tin next. She ate slowly, chewing like she was afraid of running out too soon. She didn't speak, but her eyes followed mine, cautious, curious. "My name's Clara," I said. "I was just passing through." "You stopped?" "I did." "Why?" That question cut cleaner than expected. I didn't have the words for the ache in my chest, the one that hadn't eased in years. So I just said, "Because no one else did." That night, I took her to the boarding house. Mrs. Wallace raised an eyebrow but didn't ask. Small towns are strange that way. They'll talk behind doors but let you do as you please in plain sight. I gave Ellie the floor my old wool shawl and a mug of warm milk. She sat cross-legged on the rug, rabbit curled in her arms like it was breathing. She asked no questions, didn't whimper. I don't think she even blinked when the thunder cracked past midnight. But I did. I blinked and couldn't stop seeing her sitting alone on that bench like some forgotten promise. Charles never would have let me bring her, but Charles wasn't here. Only silence was. The next morning, she was already awake when I stirred, sitting by the window, legs tucked under her like a sparrow on a branch. "You watching for someone?" I asked. She didn't turn, just waiting to be taken. "Do you want to be taken? I don't know yet." Neither did I. I poured her a cup of milk. She sipped it like someone who knew not to expect more. And I watched her, like someone standing too close to a cliff, unsure whether they were about to fall or fly. Later, as we walked into town, folks stared. Sheriff Wexler tipped his hat but said nothing. The preacher's wife crossed the street, and from the porch of the general store, Reverend Cyrus Bell watched us with that polished smile that never reached his eyes. "Strays always find the kind-hearted," he said to no one in particular. That was the first time I realized this wasn't just a kind act. It was a decision that came with cost. And yet, I didn't put Ellie's hand down. At the grocer's, I let her choose a piece of candy. She picked one that swirled red like fire trapped in glass. She didn't say thank you, just held it in her palm, turning it over like it might tell her something about the world. Ever had one, I asked. No. But I've wanted one. Sometimes the wanting is the harder part. That night, after she'd gone to sleep, I sat by the fire with her rabbit in my lap. Its stitches were loose. I found a needle and thread, sewed its ear back on, while the wind rattled the shutters like someone knocking, but too afraid to come in. I didn't sleep much. But in the quiet, I heard something I hadn't heard in years, breathing that wasn't my own. Soft, steady, a rhythm that said, I'm here. And for the first time since I lost my last baby, I didn't feel alone. Tomorrow, I told myself I'd take Ellie to the old family ranch. No one had lived there in years, but maybe we could. Maybe names weren't fixed things. Maybe belonging could be rewritten. All I knew was this: whatever came next, I had already stepped off the train. And I wasn't going back. Chapter 2. What if the man who left was the only one who ever knew how to stay? The road to my family's ranch was more memory than map, half swallowed by grass scattered with broken fence posts and stones that once marked something sacred. I hadn't set eyes on that land in 6 years, and I never expected to again. But Ellie sat beside me in the wagon, her bare feet swinging over the edge, the red marble in her hand, catching sunlight like it remembered things we'd both tried to forget. I don't think this place likes people much, she said as we bumped over a rut. It doesn't, I replied. But it remembers them. The house rose out of the earth like an old hymn, familiar and cracked, leaning slightly to the west, like it was listening to something I couldn't hear. The paint had surrendered long ago. The porch sagged into the middle, and the chimney wore a scar from a lightning strike I was too young to fear. I didn't know what I expected Ellie to say, but she just stood there, still as prayer, then walked up the steps like she'd always lived there. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of cedar. My mother's rocking chair waited in the corner, like it knew it'd return with someone too small and too quiet. Ellie trailed her fingers along the edge of the table, then pressed her ear to the floor, as if she was listening for stories trapped in the boards. She asked if she could sleep near the hearth. I said yes, though I didn't remember offering. That was how things were beginning to shift. Ellie didn't demand space, but she took it. Gently. Like someone planting a flag she never meant to raise. I was sweeping cobwebs from the kitchen beam when I heard the horse. One set of hooves. Measured. Deliberate. Then a boot hit dirt. I looked out the window and felt something between a shiver and a memory. Wade Tomlin was tying his mare to the post like he still belonged here. His hat was pulled low against the light, and the limp in his step was more pronounced than I remembered, though he moved like a man who'd stopped apologizing for it. I thought ghosts didn't knock, I said as I opened the door. He didn't smile. Wade never did, but something flickered behind his eyes when he looked at me like a match striking just long enough to see what might have been. Gates down, he said. I know. He nodded toward the barn. Want it fixed? Do what you came to do, I said, and stepped aside. Ellie appeared beside me like a shadow that had learned to walk. She didn't speak, but her gaze moved from Wade's boots to the long scar just visible along his jaw. He noticed, of course. That your girl? He asked. She's with me, I replied. The way I said it, even I wasn't sure what I meant. Wade tipped his hat toward her. Wade. Ellie didn't respond. Just looked at him, then back at me. He headed for the barn with a gait like scripture broken, but deliberate. I watched from the porch as he pried up the gate hinges, adjusted the weight, then wedged a stone beneath the sagging post. His hands moved with a kind of reverence, the kind of patience most men reserve for prayers or horses. Ellie sat on the steps and didn't take her eyes off him once. When the sun dipped, I brought out a tin of coffee and 2 bowls of stew. Wade took the bowl but stayed standing. Ellie handed him a napkin, and he nodded like it was the first kind act he'd received all month. You used to come here, I said. Long time ago, he replied. You used to leave just as quick. That hasn't changed. And yet, he stayed past dark. Later, Ellie asked if she could draw. I gave her one of my mother's old sewing journals, the pages still smelling faintly of rosewater and ink. She lay on her belly near the hearth, drawing by firelight. When she was done, she handed me the page. Wade's hands, rough-lined, one knuckle crooked, but drawn with the kind of care that makes you look twice. He fixes things like they matter, she said. I folded the page carefully, as if it were proof that something real had happened. That night, after Ellie had curled around her rabbit and marble like a nest of soft defiance, I found Wade still sitting on the porch rail. The stars above were wide and watching, and the night air carried the scent of wild sage. "Why'd you come back?" I asked. He didn't answer right away, just ran his thumb along the edge of a pocket knife. Used to think leaving meant I wouldn't break anything he said. Turns out some things break because you don't stay. I didn't look at him. My throat was tight. "She's not mine," I said. "You want her to be—" I blinked. "It doesn't matter what I want." "Course it does," he said, quiet but certain. It always did. When he left, he didn't say goodbye, but he tied the gate shut with a length of leather and smoothed the path to the barn as he passed like a man who didn't want dust to rise after him. Inside, I found Ellie still awake. She asked, "Did you love him once? Who, the man with the scar?" I hesitated. "Maybe." She nodded. "He looked at you like he remembers." I sat beside her and ran my fingers through her tangled hair. "You don't have to fix me," I whispered. "You don't have to stay broken," she replied. The fire cracked. The wind whispered against the window like someone asking to be let in. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I listened to the house breathe again, to Ellie's soft murmurs in her sleep, to the echo of Wade's boots on the porch. The next morning, I found a single white feather on the steps. Maybe from a hawk, maybe from something I couldn't name, but I picked it up anyway. And I kept it. Chapter 3. What kind of God smiles while he takes a child away? The sun came up mean that morning. Not golden, not gentle, just a hot slap of light on the porch that made the boards groan. I stood at the stove waiting for the coffee to boil and watched Ellie press her marble against the window pane like it might show her the future. She didn't say a word, but I could feel something tight winding up in her chest. The wind had stilled, the kind of stillness that makes animals look toward the hills and people lock their doors. Wade hadn't returned since the night he folded her drawing into his coat and walked off like it cost him something to stay. His boot prints were still on the path, though. I hadn't swept them away. I wasn't sure I ever would. Ellie offered me half her biscuit at breakfast, and I took it without comment. There are kindnesses too sacred for words. The buggy arrived before noon, gray horse black wheels dust trailing like a warning. Reverend Cyrus Bell didn't knock. He never did. His presence asked for no permission, only quiet compliance. He stepped onto the porch as though it belonged to him. "Sister Clara?" he said, removing his hat. His smile was warm, in the way fire is warm when it's burning down your house. "May I come in?" "You're already halfway there?" I said, not moving aside. His eyes flicked past me. "So it's true then. The child." Ellie stood behind the doorframe, her marble gripped tight rabbit hanging limp. She didn't blink. "She has a name," I said. "Of course," he replied smoothly, "but no people, no papers, no record of birth or baptism. These things matter, Clara, especially now." "Why now?" "Because rumor moves faster than truth. And Clayrock is listening." I crossed my arms. "So you came to bless the house or claim it?" He stepped inside, slow as a sermon. "You know I've always admired your sense of duty. Even after Denver." His eyes narrowed slightly. "It's not your barrenness I judge, Clara. It's your defiance." The words hit sharp and low. I felt them in places I didn't know still bruised. "She was left behind," I said. "I didn't ask for her, but she came. And I won't throw her back to the wolves just because she doesn't come with a ribbon and a pew." He gave me a practiced sigh. "The Burkes have already expressed their willingness. They've got a room, a reputation, a photograph on the church wall." They also have a child they sent back last spring. A misunderstanding, he said too quickly. She had bruises, I said. I saw them. He stepped closer. You're making this hard. No, Reverend. I'm making this honest. His face shifted just enough to see the steel beneath the velvet. The council will convene in 3 days. Consider this notice. If you care about this girl, prepare her for departure. Maybe she should prepare to stay. I pray for you, Clara, he said. But God can't help a woman who keeps trying to mother what she was never meant to hold. Ellie flinched. I stepped between them without thinking. My voice came low and firm. Then Hess not the kind of God I want in this house. Reverend Bell left without blessing a thing. His buggy wheels carved deep lines in the earth like someone trying to prove they were here. After he'd gone, Ellie stepped into the sunlight. She didn't cry, but her marble slipped from her hand and rolled across the porch like something trying to escape. That night, Wade returned. No warning, no knock, just the creak of the gate and the sound of a horse that knew the way. He handed Ellie a sack of apples. She picked the smallest one and offered it back to him. He smiled barely and took a bite. She grinned like she'd cracked a code. I told him about the visit, about the council, the Burkes, the threat cloaked in scripture. He didn't speak for a while, just stood there on the porch looking out at the fields like they might answer for us. You knew this would come, he said. I knew it might, I replied. She's not mine, I added quieter, but it feels like she's always been heading toward me. He looked down at the dust. Then maybe you're the only one who can hold her. Ellie was drawing again by the hearth. This time, 3 figures, a tall man, a woman with a crooked braid, and a girl holding both their hands. Over their heads, she'd written in blocky letters, not a picture, a home. She handed it to Wade. He held it for a long time, then folded it like a prayer and slid it into the same pocket as the last one. Later, I found Ellie asleep with both arms around her rabbit marble tucked under her pillow. I stood by the window and stared into the dark. I didn't want to sleep. I wanted to stay upright, like a soldier keeping watch over something too fragile to move. Wade joined me there, said nothing, but he stood close enough for our shoulders to touch. I don't know what happens next, I whispered. We stand, he said. And if they push, we don't fall easy. His hand brushed mine. Just once. Enough to say what neither of us dared. The wind picked up again, soft and rising, like breath returning after a long, hard silence. And for the first time since Denver, I felt like someone who hadn't lost everything. I felt like someone who could still choose. Chapter 4. What do you call a family when the town votes against it? The morning of the hearing wore a hush like mourning clothes. Not even the wind stirred through the cottonwoods. The chickens didn't fuss. The dog didn't bark. Ellie sat on the steps of the porch with her rabbit in her lap and the red marble held in her palm like it might grant wishes if she stayed still enough. She didn't ask what would happen. She just looked out over the field like it might answer for me. I brushed her hair with fingers that weren't steady and tied the blue ribbon she liked with a knot I hoped would hold. When she turned to face me, her eyes were calm, but too old for 9. Do I have to speak? She asked. You can if you want, I said. What if I mess it up? Then we start again. Wade hitched the wagon while I packed a piece of cold cornbread and the last 2 apples from the root cellar. He wore the shirt Yet mended last winter, the one with the frayed cuffs and a patch near the collarbone where he'd once been shot. He didn't speak as we loaded in. Neither did I. What was there left to say? The road to Clay Rock felt longer than usual. Dust curled beneath the wheels like smoke from an old fire, and the air carried a tension that couldn't be named. Ellie sat between us, boots tapping lightly against the floorboards, hands tucked beneath her thighs like she was trying to make herself smaller. She wasn't afraid. She was bracing. The chapel was fuller than I expected. Not just the council. Not just the Burkes with their clean gloves and empty smiles. But townsfolk, people who hadn't spoken my name in years, now whispered it with interest. Their heads tilted, like they were watching something too delicate to touch and too scandalous to ignore. Reverend Bell sat in the center of the council bench, his robe freshly pressed, a red ribbon in his breast pocket, the kind of red meant to draw the eye, the kind of red that dares a woman to bleed and call it faith. To his left, Sheriff Wexler. To his right, Miss Lottie Caro, school board secretary, and the only woman in town who ever looked at Ellie with something like warmth. I held on to that. The Burkes were first to speak. Of course they were. Elsie adjusted her posture 3 times before she even said a word. We believe Ellie deserves structure, she began, her voice clear and sweet as stale lemonade. Discipline, moral guidance, and a real future. We can offer her that. We've already prepared her room. Yellow curtains, a shelf for books, a place she can grow. Grady nodded beside her like a wind-up doll. We can provide her opportunities. Miss Hartley cannot. Miss Lottie raised a brow. You've fostered before. What became of Molly Prescott? LCC's smile pinched tighter. Molly had behavioral challenges. It was an unfortunate mismatch. Molly had bruises, I said before I could stop myself. A sharp silence fell. I saw them, I said again. She was quieter when she left than when she came. Reverend Bell cleared his throat. Let's not turn this into an inquest. I'm not, I said. I'm turning it into a mirror. Wade stood then. No preamble, no polish. Just him and his voice like gravel in gravity. She ain't blood to either side, but she's breath in a house that forgot how to breathe. And she's choice. That's more than a name on a form. He looked at Reverend Bell square. You said once that grace ain't earned its given, so give her some. Bell didn't blink. Grace doesn't ignore order. Then maybe your gods never met a scared little girl holding a rabbit with no face, Wade said. Lottie looked down to hide her smile. Bell turned to me. Miss Hartley, have you filed for legal guardianship? No, I said. I didn't think I'd need paperwork to love someone. Ellie stepped forward. She hadn't been asked, but she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned that waiting for permission sometimes meant never being seen at all. She looked at each of them, then down at her marble. When I got off the train, I had nothing, just a rabbit with no eyes. No one asked my name. No one wanted to, but Miss Clara did. She glanced back at me. I was crying and didn't even notice. Now I have my own cup at her table. I have a bed with a blanket she folded herself. Wade taught me to brush the horse and not be afraid of its mouth. The dog lets me sleep next to him. I belong there. She held up her marble. And I want to stay. It was the quiet after that broke me. Not the applause, not the gasps, just the hush, the deep inhale of a room realizing that truth doesn't always come dressed in robes or lace gloves. Sheriff Wexler stood. I vote yes. Lottie Caro followed. Yes. Reverend Bell paused longer. Too long. Then voice tight said, yes. And just like that, the vote was done. But the choosing had happened long before. Ellie walked back to me slower now. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. She slipped her hand into mine like it had always been there. Wade stepped forward, placed a hand on her shoulder, and for a moment, we were 3 people who had nothing once but had somehow chosen each other anyway. I didn't look at the Burkes as they left. Didn't need to. Love isn't proven by how loud you shout. It's shown by who stays when the rest of the room walks away. And we stayed. Chapter 5, What if the home you build is made from all the things they tried to throw away? The morning after the vote, the wind returned. Not like the kind that knocked shutters loose or rattled old gates, but something quieter, a hush that moved through the cottonwoods like breath, slow and sure. It slid beneath the porch rails, stirred the drying herbs in the kitchen window, and settled itself into the corners of the house like it had been invited. Ellie was already awake when I came down. She sat cross-legged on the floor beside the hearth, threading a piece of twine through the spine of her drawings like she was stitching her own story together. Her rabbit sat beside her newly patched, and the red marble had been placed inside an old glass jar she'd found behind the chicken coop. It caught the morning light just right, like a sun that belonged only to her. I'm making a book, she said without looking up. A book of what? Proof, she said. That I was here. I knelt beside her. You are here. She gave me a small smile. Now I have a place to put the pages. Outside, Wade was mending the fence-lined sleeves rolled to the elbow dust, climbing his boots like a second skin. He moved slow, careful the way people do when they aren't in a rush to leave. I watched him pause, turn toward the house, and tip his head in the barest nod when he saw me at the window. He did that now, checked in without saying a word. It was its own kind of vow. After breakfast, Ellie asked if she could build a shelf above her bed. What for, I asked. For keeping things, she said. But only the kind I want. Wade handed her a hammer that looked too big in her hands, and I watched her try to lift it like it had weight beyond metal. She drove the first nail in crooked, the second bent halfway through, but she kept going. Didn't ask for help. Wade stood a few feet away, arms folded. When the third nail held, she grinned wide. That one listened. You didn't give it a choice, he said, almost smiling. Later, she placed her drawings on the shelf, along with the jarred marble, a feather she'd tucked behind her ear from the field, and a torn ribbon I'd once tied around her braid. She stood back and stared at it for a long time. Now it's a room, she said. No, I said. Now it's yours. The rest of the day passed in slow rhythm, dishes, washed wood, stacked water hauled from the well. At one point, Ellie ran barefoot through the grass with the dog-yellow dress flaring behind her like she'd been lit from the inside. I heard her laugh, not loud, but full. The kind of laugh that rises from the bones, not just the belly. That night, she helped me peel apples for a pie. Her fingers sticky with juice, she looked up and said, You know what I used to wish for? What that someone would stay long enough to hear me breathe in my sleep. I swallowed hard. And now I just hope you stay long enough to get tired of hearing it. You'll never get tired, I whispered. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. I thought it was another drawing, but it wasn't. It was a name hers, written 3 times. Ellie Mae Hartley, is that still okay? She asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Later that night, a thunderstorm rolled low across the prairie. The kind that shakes windows and splits the sky in slow, aching cracks. Ellie didn't cry, but I found her standing in the hallway, barefoot rabbit in her arms, eyes wide. I don't want the storm to take it back, she said. What? All of it? The name? The shelf? You? It can't, I said. It's already yours. She followed me to the living room, and we sat on the floor while the thunder spoke above us. Wade joined us without a word, handing her a cup of warm milk and settling beside her like he'd been made for stillness. She leaned into his shoulder, her voice a hush. Do storms ever stay no? He said. That's the one good thing about him. She nodded slowly, like that was enough for now. The next morning, the air smelled clean and the sky was rinsed blue. Ellie came down wearing her Sunday dress, the one with her new name stitched into the lining. She wore her boots too, even though they still flopped a little when she walked. Wade poured her a tin cup of coffee milk and placed the biscuit jar in front of her like it was ceremony. Can we build something today? She asked. Wade raised a brow. What more do you want? A fence, she said. He blinked. To keep what out? To keep us in? She said simply. Sometimes people forget they belong somewhere. So we built. Post by post, board by board. Ellie carried small nails in the pocket of her dress. Wade showed her how to hold a rail without pinching her fingers. I measured, marked, held the board still. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. And when it was done, Ellie ran her hand along the top of the fence and said, Now even the wind knows where home stops. That evening, we ate pie on the porch while the dog laid across our feet and the horizon softened like a bruise healing. Ellie climbed into bed on her own, her rabbit on one side, the marble jar on the shelf above her. Before she closed her eyes, she whispered, You don't have to check on me tonight. I stood in the doorway longer than I needed to, just in case. But she didn't wake. And the wind, brushing gentle through the open window, carried the smell of apple and sawdust, and something else I hadn't felt in years. Belonging. Real rooted quiet as breath. And this time, I didn't brace for its leaving. I let it stay. There are seasons in life when silence weighs heavier than noise, when what we carry isn't seen, but shapes us all the same. Maybe you know what it means to stay because you must not, because you choose. Maybe you've felt the ache of holding a house together with your bare hands while your heart feels like it's falling apart inside it. Or perhaps you've seen a child look at you wondering if this time someone will stay long enough to matter. This story wasn't just about a girl and a ranch. It was about building a life from broken parts, stitching together moments of love loss and second chances. It's a reminder that healing doesn't always come loud or fast. Sometimes it comes in small gestures, a name stitched into fabric, a shelf made crooked but proud, a fence built not to keep the world out, but to remind us that we belong somewhere. For those who've been through storms of their own grief, betrayal, reinvention, this tale might feel like a mirror. It's for the ones who've asked, is it too late to begin again? The answer always is no. As long as you're breathing, you can still choose gentleness. You can still offer shelter. You can still build a home, not just for someone else, but maybe for that part of yourself you forgot to tend. You've just heard one powerful story, but many more remain untold. Click to discover more raw, gripping, deeply human tales from the Wild West.